I had moved into the neighborhood only a few months earlier, carrying the weight of a messy breakup and the hope that a new place might feel safer. Every morning, I would leave my small apartment just as the sun peeked over the rooftops, coffee in hand, and nod or wave to the neighbors I passed. Across the street stood a faded blue house, its shutters weathered and its lawn overtaken by weeds. From the first morning, I noticed the man who lived there. He would appear at his window, a steaming cup of coffee cradled in his hands, and wave back with a slow, deliberate smile. At first, it was just a simple neighborly gesture, comforting in its predictability. I'd wave, he'd wave, and for a brief moment, the world felt ordinary. He never spoke, never stepped outside, just a quiet presence behind the glass. Some mornings, I'd see him adjusting the curtains or trimming the hedges, always alone, always meticulous. Life moved on its quiet, familiar track until one morning everything shifted. It was a particularly chilly day when I left later than usual. The street was empty, my breath forming clouds in the crisp air. I looked up, out of habit, and there he was, standing perfectly still at the window. I waved, but his hand stayed frozen against the glass. I remember thinking how unnaturally pale it looked, almost luminous in the dim morning light. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe he hadn't noticed me, maybe he was unwell, but the image lingered all day. That evening, returning from work, I froze in the driveway. The blue house's window held the same unmoving figure, the light inside untouched, as if time itself had stopped behind that pane. The next morning, he waved again, the slow motion, familiar yet somehow wrong. I laughed it off during lunch with a coworker, joking, maybe he's my personal guardian angel. But when I glanced back at the window that night, the glow was gone. No figure, no warmth, only darkness. Days passed. The house seemed deserted, trash bins untouched, no mail collected, not a car in the driveway. Curiosity gnawed at me. One evening, I crossed the street to investigate. Up close, the blue house looked far older than I had realized. Peeling paint, cracked steps, weeds crawling across the porch. I peered through the window, where the man usually appeared. Empty. Bare walls, no furniture, no sign of life. Half buried under leaves was a for sale sign, face down. My pulse quickened. That night I barely slept. I closed the blinds but still felt a familiar gaze pressing through the glass. Even in darkness, the feeling lingered, a subtle weight that made my chest tighten. And when sleep finally claimed me, I dreamt of the pale hand against the window waiting for me to wave back. The next morning, the street looked unchanged. The blue house was silent, lifeless. Yet my eyes were drawn to that window again. Halfway through my morning routine, I swore I saw a shadow shift behind the curtain, though no breeze stirred. Rationally, it should have been impossible, but my gut told me otherwise. The unease stayed with me, curling around my thoughts like smoke. Something about that house was wrong. Something about the man, or whatever I had been waving to, wasn't what it seemed. For the next few days, the blue house across the street sat as silent as a photograph. Every morning before work and every evening when I returned, I found myself staring at that second-floor window where the man used to stand. The glass reflected nothing now, just a dull square of sky, empty and cold, no figure, no movement, not even the faint glow I'd grown used to seeing through the curtains. It felt wrong how quickly the house had gone still. The trash bins by the curb remained perfectly aligned, unmoved since last week. Plastic lids sealed tight, no signs of them ever being dragged out or emptied. Mail overflowed from the rusted box, envelopes beginning to sag from the morning dew. Not a car had appeared in the driveway, and no footsteps disturbed the thin film of dust on the porch. It was like the house had folded inward and swallowed its own presence. I kept telling myself it wasn't my business. People leave, People move, they don't always say goodbye. But the human brain hates unfinished patterns, and something about the abrupt vanishing lodged itself behind my ribs. By the fourth day, curiosity no longer whispered, it pushed. That afternoon, I crossed the street with the reluctant determination of someone who already knew. They wouldn't like what they found. The yard felt colder than the rest of the neighborhood, as if the air around the place had thinned. Leaves collected in crisp, untouched piles, undisturbed by footsteps or wind. Even the birds seemed to avoid the roofline. I stepped onto the porch. The wood groaned softly under my weight, dust blooming around my shoes. When I tried the door handle, it turned without resistance. Not locked, not even stiff, as if waiting. Inside, the darkness swallowed the sound of my breath. Room after room stretched out before me, open, hollow, lifeless. Bare walls with faint rectangular discoloration hinted where pictures or shelves once hung. A thin layer of dust coated the floors, unbroken by any recent movement. No furniture, no echo of a life lived here, no smell of cooking, no lingering detergent scent, nothing human. Just vacancy, heavy and intentional. Up near the front steps, something caught my eye. A wooden board, half buried under layers of brittle leaves. I crouched and pulled it free. It was a for sale sign, edges warped, the printed letters faded. It looked old, older than the time I'd lived in the neighborhood. So why was it tossed aside, and why had no one mentioned the house being on the market? A cold ripple crawled up my spine. That's when I felt it, a presence, not a sound, not a shadow, just a pressure. The unmistakable sensation of being watched, not from the street, not from outside, from inside the house. I turned slowly, my pulse thudding in my ears. The doorway behind me was empty. The hall was empty. The entire house was a blank shell, and yet the feeling clung to the air, thick and unmistakable, wrapping itself around me like invisible fingers. I stepped outside quickly, inhaling the cold air like it might rinse the unease off me, but it didn't. The tension followed me across the street, trailing behind me with a patience that felt almost deliberate. By the time I reached my doorstep, my heartbeat still hadn't settled. That night, as I lay awake staring at my ceiling, the memory of the hollow house pressed harder into my thoughts, curling around them like smoke, thin at first, then suffocating. And when I finally drifted into sleep, I saw the blue house again. But this time, a pale hand dragged itself slowly down. Even after that dream of the window, I told myself it was stress, behind it, nothing more than my mind twisting shadows into meaning. But denial only works when the world cooperates, and mine was starting to fracture in small, quiet ways. Every morning, I tried to avoid looking at the blue house, yet each time, some instinct forced my gaze upward. At first, nothing changed. The same empty window, the same dull reflection of the sky. But on the third morning, as I stepped outside with my coffee, a flicker stirred behind the curtain, a small shift, a lean movement, too deliberate for wind, too quiet to be real. My breath snagged. The curtain settled instantly, but that instant was enough to impossibly confirm what I had feared. Something was in that house. Something that shouldn't be. All day at work, my thoughts kept circling back to that window. Every time I blinked, I saw the faint ripple of fabric, the impression of a shape standing just beyond my view. By lunch, the unease had carved itself into a dull ache behind my eyes. I told myself I needed answers, anything to break the paranoia building inside me. That evening, as the sun dipped behind the houses, I spotted Mrs. Holden, the elderly woman who lived 2 doors down, sweeping her porch. She'd lived in this neighborhood her whole life. If anyone knew the truth, it would be her. "Excuse me," I began, trying not to sound frantic. "Do you know anything about the blue house, the one across from me?" She paused mid-sweep, eyes narrowing behind smudged glasses. "That place," she muttered. "It's been empty for years." A cold weight dropped in my stomach. "No," I insisted quietly. "Someone lived there, A man. I saw him every morning. She shook her head slowly. Honey, nobody's lived there since the Harrow family moved out. The place got tied up in bank disputes after the father died. It's been vacant ever since. Vacant for years. I felt my pulse start to stutter. You must have seen an old reflection or something, she added. That house doesn't have electricity. Hasn't for a long time. My tongue felt dry. There were lights on. I'd seen them. I'd seen him wave. Mrs. Halden gave me a small pitying smile, like she thought I was confused, tired, mistaking shadows for people. I thanked her quietly and walked back home, but my legs felt wooden, disconnected from my body. That night, dread slithered through my thoughts like oil. The house had been empty for years. Empty. So who had I been waving to? By the time the sky turned black, I couldn't resist. I stepped out onto my porch, staring across the street. The blue house crouched in the darkness like a carcass left behind by time. Nothing moved. For a moment, I almost convinced myself everything had been in my head. Then, as my eyes adjusted to the gloom, the curtain on the second-floor window shifted, slowly, like something inside was sliding closer. A shape formed, not a full figure, not even a clear outline, just two pale, hollow eyes peering out from the darkness, unblinking, watching me. My breath vanished. I stepped back without meaning to, heart slamming so hard it hurt. But the figure didn't retreat this time. It stood there, closer than ever, as if it had been waiting for me to notice it properly. And then the worst part. It wasn't standing at the window. It was standing just outside it.